Welcome to My Naturally Sweetened Life. Let me show you how to make homemade beef broth and pressure can it. The first thing you need is soup bones, marrow bones, or knuckle bones, whatever your butcher calls them, but they are specifically for making broth. Take the bones, place them on a baking sheet, and stick them in a 375 to 400 degree oven for about 45 minutes. I made the mistake of not putting parchment paper down. I wish I would have done that because that would have made my sheet pan a whole lot easier to clean. Now that the bones are roasted, place them in a roasting oven or a large stock pot, whichever you choose, and slowly cook these for several hours or until the meat falls off the bones. I'm doing a mega batch, so I have a large stock pot and I have a roasting oven, and I'm going to cook these all night long on low, about 275 degrees for the roasting oven, and I'm going to let this work for me all night while I sleep, and then in the next morning, as you can see, it's ready to go. The next step is to strain your broth. I take all the bones out of the broth and any of the extras like onions and celery, any seasonings or any garlic or whatever you put in there, we're going to strain the broth through a fine mesh strainer. Then I can pour all of this strained broth into my glass jars and put it in the fridge overnight. So all that fat in the beef broth is going to rise to the top and I can just scrape it off once it's cold. Another blessing from making your own broth is you get extra meat from the bones. Once this cools, I'm going to come back in and pick off all the extra meat, and I can use that in my meals in the next few days. This shredded meat is really good for maybe sandwiches or in gravies or soup or any Mexican meals that are your family's favorite. I ended up getting 5.5 gallons out of this one batch because I had so many bones. You can see there is so much fat on beef broth that you really need to strain all of that off. You don't want it in your pressure canning because that can get in the way of a good seal. So we're going to stick this in the fridge overnight, and you can see here it all raised to the top, and now I can just pop it out and put it in a bowl, and we'll deal with that later. And now we're going to move on to the canning process. So I am going to reheat my broth so that it comes to a low simmer or a low boil. And that way we can put it in our jars and pressure can this broth to make it shelf stable. This is the second straining that I do for my beef broth. And now I have a fine mesh sieve and a cheesecloth on top, and I pour my broth through that, and that catches all the little tiny bits that we missed in the first time that we strained it. This makes for a cleaner broth so you have less floaties once you can it. Here's a little glimpse of what that looks like. This is what our cheesecloth caught as the broth was going through, and I'm pretty happy that that's not going in my jars. Before I fill the jars with broth, I always give them a wash in hot and soapy water. This not only sanitizes the jars, but it also gives me a chance to thoroughly inspect all the areas of my jar, especially at the top where my lid will sit, just to make sure there's no cracks or any chips out of my jar. If there are cracks or chips, I just throw that jar away and get a new one. Ladle the broth into the jars up to 1-inch headspace. Continue this process until all of your jars are filled. Wipe the rims of your jar with a clean cloth, or you can dip a paper towel into vinegar. That way it cleans all the fat off of the top of your jar. And then you put your lids on and then your rings. Place your jars into the canner. The heat has already been turned on for my canner, and the inside water is very hot, and that's okay because my jars are hot. You want your inside of your canner to be about the same temperature as your jars. Then we're going to place the lid on, lock it in place, and we're going to wait for a steady stream of steam to come out of the vent. Once that happens, you set your timer for 10 minutes. Once the timer is up, you put on your weight, and then you wait on that to rock back and forth. Once it starts to rock back and forth, you'll turn on your timer, And beef broth is processed for between 25 and 30 minutes. There it goes. Now we'll turn on the timer. You need to know your altitude for where you live so that you know how long you're going to process your beef broth for. You might live at a higher altitude than me, so make sure you figure that out before you start canning. And if you don't know where to find that, I will leave a link in the description so you can check that out. Okay, our time is up. I'm going to turn off the heat and let everything cool off on its own. This will stop rocking and the back little button will drop down and the pressure will go to 0. I lost my footage, so from now on I'm just going to show you a demonstration of what I would do if my canner was hot and I just got done processing beef broth. So now that everything is down to 0, the pressure is gone, I'm going to come to my canner, carefully open it, and just set the lid on top for it to cool. After about 5 minutes, I take the lid off completely, use my jar grabbers to take the jars out of the canner and place it on a towel-lined countertop. Let the jars cool completely for about 8 hours or maybe overnight. Remove the rings and check for a good seal, and then, if it's sealed, put your jars in a hot soapy water and give them a good wash. You want to wash the outside of your jars after canning because if there's anything left over like the beef fat or any beef broth, it can grow mold on the outside of your jar. It won't hurt the inside contents because you have a good seal, but it is kind of gross to have mold growing on the outside. So give them a good wash so they'll be nice and clean to sit on your storage. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. If you would like a printable instructions for canning beef broth and even how to make beef broth, I will leave both links in the description below to mynaturallysweetenedlife.com. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.